Hello, and welcome to Redaction Report's weekly news roundup. With me, James Moules, once again. This week, I'm joined by Redaction's old friend, Richard Hansen. Richard, how's it going?
Oh, can't complain, mate. It's nice to be back.
Absolutely. Okay, so today, once again, we're going to be walking through a few talking points from some big news stories around the world. And we're going to start with the UK today because, Richard, I have a very, very important question to kick things off with. Who's the better dancer, Michael Gove or Theresa May?
Well, I think Michael Gove is probably the better dancer if it's after 10 o'clock at night. Whereas if it was if it was during business hours, I think we're probably going to go with the member for Maidenhead. I think is how she'd like to be known as. Um, yeah, that was an interesting story, wasn't it? I mean, I don't know
Yes,
what.
to give some perspective to our viewers, this was footage that surfaced online of Michael Gove, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancashire, a senior cabinet minister, was pictured, well, filmed, raving in an Aberdeenshire nightclub. And this is a man in his 50s.
Yeah, and I actually
Senior
have
cabinet minister.
I've had the pleasure of actually going to that nightclub before. I've done a bit of work up in
Oh,
Aberdeen
yeah.
in a past life, and so I have been to the Bohemia nightclub, and it's definitely not a place that you would normally find a 50-year-old man. My favorite line in it was actually that apparently he was arguing with the doorman over the £5 cover charge or whatever it was. But his logic was, I don't have to pay £5. I'm the Chancellor of the Duchy of using his title.
Yes,
So
this is reportedly what happens. I should clarify. We're not
sure, yeah.
we're not sitting on solid proof of that, but yeah.
No, indeed, allegedly, said,
Mm,
according to various social media sources. But
mm.
even if it's not true, it does sound like something he would say. So anyway, it was an interesting little
Mm.
tidbit of information.
Cool. But yes, that aside, let's take a look at recent opinion polling in the UK because the Conservatives are still sitting in a pretty strong position, all things
Yeah.
considered. Recent Redfield and Wilton poll put the Conservatives at 41%, Labour trailing at 33%, the Lib Dems at 9%, the SNP sitting on 4%, and the Greens on 5%. Bear in mind that the SNP only stand in Scotland. Um, Conservatives are still doing strong in the polls and have been for months and months now. What do you put this down to?
Yeah, they're Teflon, isn't it? They just, no matter what happens, they just don't seem to take a hit.
In
Look, I
spite of the
think
Hancock scandal, in spite of.
in spite of everything,
Mm,
I think there's a couple of things. Well, in terms of COVID, we have our freedoms, quote unquote. There are a lot of sort of socially liberal people who, it's libertarian people, sorry, I should say, who value that quite highly. And we're not having to necessarily wear masks. There's masks indoors if we don't want to, and social distancing isn't a thing. You can go to the pub, you can go to the football, and to your average voter, I mean, that is a significant thing. And I think voters are saying, well, the Conservatives have given us these freedoms, as it were. And the opposite side to the coin is that in my view, Keir Starmer continues to sort of not really present any kind of effective alternative. I think at this point in the electoral cycle, if you're an opposition leader, you want to be sort of almost pivoting from opposition leader to sort of government in waiting. If you really are serious about taking power at the next election, you really need to start framing your vision and framing it quite quickly. So at the moment, better the devil people might. I mean, I know Keir Starmer's
yes, I
opinions.
believe looking at opinion polling at the moment, I will triple check this before we put this out and probably include a link in the description. But I believe I'm right in saying that under recent polling, both Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer are in negative figures in approval rating, and
Yeah,
quite substantially negative figures. So,
indeed.
like you say, I think you're quite right. It's better the devil you know. Yes, Boris Johnson's unpopular among a lot of people, but I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that the public at large believe Keir Starmer would do any better. And that's the
No,
bottom line.
indeed. And I think we're not quite yet at that point in recovery where people are perhaps seeing a sluggish recovery. Maybe it's to do with Brexit. things that, food shortages and driver these sorts of things are only going to potentially get worse. And these are things that are going to affect people's daily lives. It's going to be interesting to see how the winter goes. Are we going to move into a sort of another wave, and are we going to start seeing closures and restrictions being brought back in, or are we going to sort of push through it, and that may have an effect on the needle? But the Conservative Party and the government, they've been, by and large, except for a couple of notable exceptions, no resignations over anything particularly serious. And so, it's hard to see what is going to erode that support. I think personally, the only thing that hasn't occurred is the presentation of an alternative vision for government. And until Labour managed to mount an effective opposition, I think we're going to see numbers for the Conservatives staying in the 40s more or less, and Labour will probably continue to be mired in the low to mid 30s, which is where they are right now.
Yes, I think it does seem to be doomed to be that way at the moment. Obviously, Labour had a surge in support later last year, and Keir Starmer's approval was doing relatively well there, but it's only gone downhill from there. And I think the turning point for Starmer was the loss of Hartlepool. I don't think he's going to be coming back from that anytime soon. That was seen as a disaster for Starmer and the local election results more broadly. So that's just it. Starmer doesn't seem like an inspiring alternative. And to that record, he's never been a politician in government. So long as he's been in Parliament, Labour have been in opposition. He has no record to defend. He has nothing to say to prove he'd be any better. And, that's going to hamstring Labour for a while. And I agree. And this is where I think, a lot of people tout Andy Burnham as a potential successor. I think that's probably the way to go. Why? Because Andy Burnham's Metro Mayor. He has a record to defend. And that's the only clutching at straws Labour's got at defending a record of government is through putting forward a Metro Mayor as their next leader. And I think that's the way it's got to go.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think Labour probably have to lose another election for that to happen, because Andy Burnham has already committed to serving out his term as Manchester Mayor, which is what will actually take us past the next election. But more or less,
Boris Johnson, let's not forget, served as Mayor of Greater London and an MP at the same time for a short while.
He did for a while, yeah. So that's not impossible that Andy Burnham could be jettisoned into a safe seat or something. Who knows what could happen. But another thing I think is interesting is that at the beginning of the summer, but just before we kind of eased all restrictions, Keir Starmer said publicly, this summer, I'm going to go out and I'm going to meet with, these red wall voters. I'm going to meet with people who deserted us in 2019 and continue to stay away in the local elections. I'm going to engage with these people, and I'm going to present an alternative vision. Well, we're almost at party conference time. And the only thing that sticks in my mind, and I mean, I probably watch the news more than your average person, is a picture of Keir Starmer talking to some people in Blackpool, with Blackpool Tower behind him. So obviously it was Blackpool Tower. However, one of the most sort of retweeted comments on that was, I don't think you're going to win any votes, mate, by taking a picture of yourself in Paris, confusing the Eiffel Tower with the Blackpool Tower. So I mean, whether or not that has obviously any traction in it, if that's the only thing that I can remember, I mean, these images are really powerful. And Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings back then understood that. So if that's going to be a snapshot into how he's going to attempt to win government in 2024, I think Labour are not looking good at this stage anyway.
I mean, that's the thing with Starmer, is I think he knows the words but not the music when it comes to campaigning and trying to, win over swing voters in Middle England, for example, and winning back the old heartlands.
Yeah, he's been he can prosecute an argument in the House of Commons very well. If he all he had to do was stand up at Prime Minister's questions once a week, then he'd be great. But yeah, when it comes to relating to your average working class, middle class, it range broad, bringing together a broad coalition of voters, something that various other figures in the Labour Party I think would do better. And I'm not approaching it from an ideological perspective. I'm not saying it needs to be from the left or from the right. I'm just saying there are more charismatic figures in the party who I think would do a better job, from the left and the right. But yeah, I don't
I
get to pick a
I
leader.
think there's a very small number of them, to be honest, at this point. I mean,
Uh,
how many members of the Labour front bench do you reckon the average voter can name?
oh, probably very few. But there are two notable exceptions for me. We've touched on one, Andy Burnham, because he has a record to defend. He's a charismatic guy. He's from the north. He's stuck it to the government when it's back with coronavirus legislation. He's been re-elected with an increased majority in Manchester in the north, an area that Labour do need to win back the trust of voters on a general election scale. The other person I think that would make a tremendous leader is Lisa Nandy, and I've banged on about this on this podcast and otherwise for months and months, God, almost years now. I think I wrote an op-ed piece after the 2019 election, basically saying how she could save Labour. She's a woman. She's northern. She's from she where's her family from originally? Does she have Indian parents?
I think she had one Indian parent, yeah, but she was born and grew up in Manchester.
Of course, yes, yeah, but I mean, but that
Yeah.
is another, not to be a crass generalization, but that is another box that can be ticked, especially if she's facing up against someone like Rishi Sunak, and she has been in government, and she has a record to defend, and she's charismatic. They put her in front of the TV
in government
quite a lot.
She was elected in 2010.
Was she? Are you sure about that? I thought she was elected in 2005. Okay, well, aside from that, they put her up as an opposition spokesperson on various television stations all the time, and she can speak coherently about a range of issues. So if it wasn't Burnham or Nandy, I mean, to me they're the two people who I think could probably lead Labour out of this, but we're not at that point, not even close.
While we're on the subject of Labour more broadly, a small L Labour, let's talk about another recent news story, which is the in the UK, of course, again, which is the Unite Union General Secretary election. Of course, this is one of the largest trade unions in the UK and one of the Labour Party's biggest donors. Now, there was the outgoing General Secretary who didn't run for re-election was Len McCluskey, who is widely seen as a highly left-wing figure, very much a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. And he's standing down. Well, he stood down now, the election's over. There were three main contenders to replace him. There was Steve Turner, who was sort of McCluskey's anointed successor, almost widely seen as of the left of the union. There was Gerard Coyne, who was more seen as the current leadership's favourite. He was more seen as a sort of right-wing figure, or right-wing in the context of the Labour movement, at least, shall we say. And then there was Sharon Graham, who turned out to be the eventual winner. Now, she was also seen as a more left-wing candidate, but less seen as the first go-to choice of the left, shall we say, partly because Steve Turner won the most nominations in going for the General Secretary position. Now, Sharon Graham was widely seen as very much the outsider if you looked at the bookies, yet she pulled off a shock win. What do you make of that, Richard? Did you see it coming?
I didn't see it coming, but I'm very pleased it has happened. Yes, she's of the left, but she refused to stand down when Len McCluskey basically did everything in his power to stop her from standing. And the fact that, okay, she's of the left, that's not particularly relevant to me anyway, but just the fact that she doesn't owe anybody anything now. She's not really beholden to any section of the union, of the party. So it might change things in terms of the broader Labour membership. And also I think the fact that she's a woman, the more women that we can get in positions of power in different parts of the country, the better, in my opinion, as well. So for me, of those three candidates, she would be the best choice, in my opinion, and I hope that it has positive effects for the Labour Party in general.
And it's one point to make is that one of the main focus points of her campaign for the General Secretary position was let's get back to the workplace and less focus on party politics, more on workplace organising. And and I think that's probably part of the reason why her campaign was so successful unexpectedly, is that people were too focused on party politics, whether they were talking about Turner, whether they were talking about Coyne. Sharon Graham just got on the ground and did the job.
That's it. And you know, when you talk about labor more broadly, that's a problem as well. I mean, when you're not in government and you don't have any specific portfolio to attend to, it's very easy to start looking at inward and start bickering amongst yourselves. I mean, you know, Labour are the champions of the world at fighting with themselves. So you know, the less of that there is, the better. And you know, and especially when it comes to things like workplace relations, you know, I think we're going to see a bit of that moving forward. You know, now that we've had to, as a workforce in general, you know, transition to working online, and you know, and there are plenty of questions now as we move out of the pandemic and into sort of a more endemic phase. What does that look like? Are employers going to be forcing workers back into the office? Are they going to be making them work permanently from home? You know, there are lots of different machinations. You know, do they deserve to have should they have a pay cut because they don't have to commute? You know, but so there are all going to be broader questions that I think need to be answered, and somebody at the helm of the country's largest union body, who's just
One of
wants
the
to roll.
largest unions.
Yeah,
Is
who
it the
wants to?
largest?
Oh,
I
I
need to
think.
check that.
Well, it's one of the major unions
Yeah.
in this country, who wants to just roll up their sleeves and do the best for the workers.
Yeah.
Is only going to be positive, because at the end of the day, why do these people get into this? Is to help people and to make meaningful change rather than to sort of hold leadership positions for the sake of it. I think you could probably argue that might be the case for some people in the party opposite, but you know, at least in that case, it's, you know, it's tried to make people's lives demonstrably better, and fingers crossed that'll occur.
Absolutely. And there's one thing that struck me with the United leadership election, though, is how in the Labour Party, both the right of the party and the left of the party seem to be claiming it as a win for them. And that's, of course, partly because both of the two expected candidates that it would be a runoff against both lost. It's like the right of the party was saying to the left of the party, Steve Turner lost, your guy lost. And similarly, left of the party was saying to the right of the party, Gerald Coyne lost, your guy lost. So
yeah,
I think a lot of people just didn't know quite what to make of a surprise victory.
Yeah, well, there's obviously you've got to spin it one way or the other, don't you? If you've lost, if you know, if you've lost and the guy that you hope didn't win the most has also lost, I mean, that's probably the way you're going to spin it. I just hope that you know, that they're both willing to work with the new leader. I mean, I said before, she's not beholden to anybody. She's not made any promises necessarily. So maybe she'd be a good unifying figure in the sort of union side of the Labour Party. I mean, I know, you know, having Len McCluskey as the head of Unite combined with Keir Starmer as the leader of the party, obviously that there were obvious tensions and strains you could see. So again, you know, fingers crossed that they'll be able to have a bit more of a constructive relationship with Keir Starmer and the new leader.
Absolutely. One final topic we'll talk about again before we wrap up, of course, it's dominated national news headlines for weeks now, and you know, rightly so. It's the eyes of the world have been on Afghanistan and the horrifying humanitarian situation that's unfolding there as the Taliban have retaken control of the country, and it didn't take long at all for the predictable human rights abuses to kick off. Now, it's interesting taking a look at Joe Biden's approval now, because we've talked in the last couple of shows about the actions of the Taliban and what that might be. Let's take a look at the man behind the withdrawal. Obviously, Donald Trump initially negotiated the withdrawal, but Joe Biden went ahead with it. Now, we've seen recently his approval take a bit of a plummet. Do we think that domestically this move to withdraw has kind of backfired? I imagine he anticipated it would be popular domestically, and
I mean, there's a few things to unpack here. I don't think that it's going to dominate the national discourse into the 2024 election, for example. You know, the American public aren't going to vote for the guy who ended it, America's longest war, or not. They're going to vote for they're going to vote for the economy, and you know, they're going to vote for who they like more. So I mean, Joe Biden was put in a bit of an impossible position, in my opinion, because, you know, like you said, Donald Trump negotiated this withdrawal, but he kind of hamstrung his successor in the sense that he was damned if he did, and he was damned if he didn't. If he stayed in Afghanistan, or at least kicked the can down the road slightly, he's going to be criticized by other corners of his party or for the American public for doing just that. Obviously, what's happened is abhorrent, and the loss of life and things is in some ways entirely avoidable. But I applaud Joe Biden for staying the course with his decision. He said, right, I'm doing this, and I've decided that this is, we're going to be out by the August the 31st. And then, the media at large started to scream, and, people got understandably upset. And then he came out and he said, no, listen, this is what I'm doing. Right. And actually, this is why we elect these people. Right. So in some ways, he's acting quite presidentially. And it doesn't matter, and also you're talking about his approval rating as well. I looked at the Real Clear Politics average just before I came on here, and I think it was 48% approved, 49% disapprove. So he's lost a few points in there. But these people who were previously supportive of him were probably soft Republicans anyway. You've got to remember that he carried a large number of traditional Republican votes in the 2020 election, and sort of never Trumpers. So I don't think it's going to have a hugely lasting effect into the next election. And you know what? A lot of presidents, suffer approval drops, at various points in their presidency when they have to make difficult decisions. So every chance that he'll recover. I mean, he's hardly in the doldrums, and he's got plenty of time before he has to go and face the electorate again if he runs for re-election.
I think the thing that would seriously harm him with regards to the Afghanistan withdrawal is if there were a major terrorist attack in the UK that could be pinpointed, the origin of which could be pinpointed to Afghanistan.
Or in the US, you mean?
Sorry, in the US, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think it'd be great if there's one in the UK either, let's be honest.
Well, of course not, yeah.
No, for sure. But then the American voting public is very fickle, because in a two-horse race, if it is, say, I mean, it's heaven forfend, I hope it's not, but we've spoken about this ourselves, but imagine if it was Donald Trump against Joe Biden again in 2024.
Well, my money is on that at the moment, that it's a rematch.
Sure. But I just don't see people who vote. I don't see enough people changing their mind to the other guy. Like if the alternative is Trump,
I agree.
Well then,
yes.
I mean, like
Trump's strategy then would be to convince Biden voters to stay at home, not to switch to him.
Yeah, that's right. But there would be so many other things, and I don't think Trump would be able to stay on message for long enough, and and Joe Biden, it'd come back to the accountability argument. Trump was president of the United States, but he did so via the TV and via the media's opinion of him. He'd be constantly watching the TV and listening to people's critiques of him and taking that on board and changing his position. Well, Joe Biden said, know what? No, I'm the president of the United States. I've made a decision. I'm the commander in chief of the US military. We're getting out of here. We're getting out of this. I promised it in the election, and I'm following through with it. You're probably not going to like me very much, but I mean, people can't say at least he's not stuck by his principles. He said he didn't want to. He said he wanted to get out, and he is. So, in my opinion, I think he's made the right choice.
Well, I think that's all we have time for this evening. Thank you very much, everyone, once again for tuning in. Of course, this is now a weekly show. We hope to make it more consistent down the line as to which day it's going to be coming out on. But until then, please do like and subscribe. Follow us on social media. We're on the Full Works, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Give us a follow. If you're feeling especially generous, drop us a quid or two on Patreon. But until next week, goodbye from me, goodbye from Richard, and see you all soon.